Hello and welcome to my little EMCCV tutorial, how to mod a module. My name is Diana, I'm the creator of the EMCCV, and I'll show you step by step how to add something to an existing module. I'll use SailorX version 3 as an example, because that's what most of you use most of the time. And what I'll be adding is a braid in the style of Kaori Knight. That was a request, among others. So let's get started. I'll first show you what I do to prepare the file. I won't show you how I draw it because this is not a drawing tutorial. But yeah, the rest I'll show you. So first of all, I'll start up the EMCCV. All right, SailorX. And basically I'm creating a file for me to use as a reference so that I get the positioning right. And in order for this file to have the most use to me, I need to remove the background. You'll see later on, because basically I need to draw the braid behind the head, right? So that will be difficult if there is a background. Then I will also remove the fringe and any unnecessary hair. I'll choose the tied back because that takes up the least amount of space. And I will also make the hair white because all files that are supposed to be colorizable later in the EMCCV need to be white with gray shading. All right, so let's export that. And of course I have already previously done this, so I'll just show you the Photoshop file. Here we go. This is the export, minus the footer. I already removed that. I added a background layer just so it's easier on the eyes while I'm working on it. And here on a separate layer, I drew the braid for Kaori Knight. And of course, I used the colors in the hair top as a reference for my braid so that it all looks well together. By the way, this dark outline always happens when you export the SailorX or any module for that matter without a background, which is why I had it turned on per default all the time. I now allow you to export the graphics without a background. Don't want to, control you too much. If that's what you want, you can get it. Anyway, that's beside the point. Here we go. We have our braid. Now, of course, I need to save it without the background and without the base. That's what it looks like. Okay. Now, a little something about placement. There's 3 ways I can save this file now. I can just save it as it is now. It'll have the right proportions, the braid is in the right position, so I don't need to worry about positioning my file correctly. But this file is way bigger than it needs to be. So all of this space here is quite redundant, right? So I'm going to first select the entire canvas by pressing Command A, or if you're on Windows, Control A. Then I'll use the wand tool, W, in Photoshop, and I'm going to subtract from my selection all transparent pixels. Now, as you can hopefully see, let me zoom in, the selection is tightly around my actual graphic. And I could crop it now. It would then be as small as it can be, but then I need to worry about X and Y coordinates, meaning where to positioning. Basically, if I crop this now, like so, then the graphic file will be placed in the top left corner of the image, unless I figure out the X and Y coordinates of this placement. I can save myself the trouble by preserving the top left corner. So I'll do that for the sake of keeping it somewhat simple. So I'll use the marquee and select the top left corner. Now I'll crop my image. And I've kept the top left corner intact, which means that it'll still, even if I now place it at the coordinates 0, 0, which is the top left corner, the braid will be positioned correctly. I hope that makes sense. Now I export it for web, and devices, PNG with transparency turned on. The rest I'll just leave as is. Save. Okay, now let me show you prototype, modules, Sailor X version 3, data, hair, and braid Kaorinite. I already saved it previously, so I don't need to save it again, but that's, if you wanted to add a braid in the self Kaorinite, that's where I'd place it. You can also start your own folder if you want to, but then you have to worry about the file location. We'll get to that. Okay, so I've saved the file. I didn't just now because I previously did that, but you should save it. And then we're done with the graphics file. So I'll hide Photoshop. Now we need to figure out how to or where to add it to the menu, because otherwise people won't be able to select it. So we already have a braid here, braid forehead. I really should rename that to Supreme, is it? I can't remember. No, Supreme is one of the twins, but you know which one I mean, the tech witch, right? So the braid forehead is already there, so it makes sense to put the braid Kaorinite above or below. I'll put it below because that's the easiest if I go into the config file. So the config file, I'll show you first where it is. Okay, so this is my prototype directory. Here are the modules. There's Sailor X, and here is the config file. All right, let me open up the config file. I like to use Sublime Text 2. I can only recommend it because it'll make the file much more easy to read. Here we go. This is what the config file looks like, and I'll explain a little bit about the config file in a second, but just so you know, basically the config file represents the menu that you see. No, I'm going to give you a basics first, the basics. All right, so I'm not going to explain XML, which is the language in which the config file is written. There's plenty of tutorials about XML online. They can explain it way better than I can. But nevertheless, I'll give you a little overview, and don't worry, you don't need to remember this. I just want you to not be completely lost as you navigate around the config file. So I'll give you a quick primer. Okay, for that I need to put the mic a little higher. Okay, so each config file describes a module. So we have a tag module, which, oops, we need to close again. Like I said, I'm not going to explain the syntax. Okay, let me just... syntax, XML, here we go. All right, that's better. Okay, so this will now colorize the different tags for me. Okay, so this is a module. Inside the module in this case is Sailor X version 3. Inside the module we have sets. In this case it would be our hair set. That's the tabs you see in the EMCCV. And inside a set you have aspects. That's the elements that you actually see in the menu. Say braid Kaorinite, that would be an aspect. Or the top skirt, that's also an aspect. And aspects can have styles. They, in fact, must have at least one style. And if you have exactly one style, then you don't get a submenu because there's nothing to choose from. But if you have multiple styles, then you get that little cogwheel that you can click to then open up the submenu and choose the style of the aspect. For example, opaque or transparent for the top skirt. And if you want multiple styles, you just duplicate that block. Here we go. Now we have 2 styles. And you can, if you want, leave a gap in there. You don't have to, though. But inside the style, this is still just a menu item. We need the files somewhere, and they go inside the styles. And in contrast to the other, this is an XML thing. You can have tags open and close separately, or you can have one line, one tag that is self-closing, as it's called, by placing the slash in the back. Oops, in the back here. Okay, so that's the basic setup of a config file. I'm not going to go any more into detail. This is just so you've seen it before. Now let's close that down and switch back to our config file for SailorX. All right. Okay, so here is the module. Ignore all the other stuff that I didn't explain just now. You don't need it. Let's go full screen here. Okay, so here's the module. And here is the first set, which is the body set that you can tell. Did I mention this or in a previous recording? I don't remember. But every tag, as these are called, every element needs to have an ID, and it should also have a title. The ID needs to be unique within the entire file, so there can't be two elements with the same ID. Titles, however, are arbitrary. That's what you read in the menu later on. So, if you remember, I said we need to find the braid, forehead braid. So I'm going to press Command F to open the Finder and search for forehead. Here we go. No, forehead symbol. Okay, let's search for braid instead. Here we go. Okay, so already found it. This is the braid, the forehead braid. As you can see here, that's exactly the text that you see in the menu. It's an aspect. It has a style, but only one. There you go. And this is the file that gets displayed if the forehead is turned on, the braid forehead. Okay, so a little explanation. Here's the ID. It needs to be unique. Here's the title. That's what's displayed in the menu. Here's the X and Y coordinates. I'll get to that in a second. The layer also. The default color it gets displayed in. FFF would be white. This is a slight gray. No, actually, this is the reddish brown that I set as a default for every hair piece. And the parent, I'll explain that in a second. So what I'll do is this entire block here, you see, opening tag aspect and closing tag aspect. This is the block that I need to copy, to duplicate, basically. So I'll just do that. Here we go. Now, of course, like I mentioned, IDs need to be unique, so I'll rename the braid, the ID, braid Kaori Night. Okay. The title, of course, should also be changed. Kaori Night. X and Y coordinates, because I left the top left corner intact of my graphic file, this is easy, it's 0, 0. The layer, I'll leave as is for now. It'll be wrong because the forehead braid is in front of the head and the Kaori Night braid needs to be behind. But I don't know yet what the correct layer is, so I'll just leave it for now. I'll show you in a second how to figure out what the correct layer is. The default color, I use the same because why would you want to load up SailorX version 3 with multiple hair colors? And the parent. Okay, I'll explain that now. This value here is an ID, just like this one. And if you want, you can search for it to figure out what it is. But really, most of my IDs are quite self-explanatory. It says A, top hair. A stands for aspect, just like S stands for style. And top hair, well, that's the aspect top hair. What this means is if the top hair is not turned on, meaning it's turned off, she's bald, then this option, this aspect is not available. Why would it be? If there's no top hair, then the braid doesn't really make much sense either. So I'll actually leave that as well. I'll keep that for Kaori Night's braid. Okay, we get to the style. S braid forehead. Of course, I need to rename that too. Kaori Night. Let's keep it consistent. Notice this is A braid Kaori Night and this is S braid Kaori Night. You can really name it whatever you want. It just needs to be unique, but I like to name it this way so that it's very self-explanatory. The A stands for aspect, the S stands for style, braid Kaori Night. So if I see this ID anywhere in my logs, for example, I know immediately which element this is referring to. Okay, and then we have the file. Of course, we have a different file for Kaori Night, so I'll rename that Kaori Night. Here we go. And that's it already, except for the layer. So let's save this, get back to the EMCCV, relaunch. Go to the hair tab, and there it is, braid Kaorinite. Turn it on, and now we see it's placed on top as expected, but we don't want that. So now we need logging, and logging gives you a list of the layers. I'll just show you, it's easier than explaining. So I'll turn logging on. You shouldn't just arbitrarily leave it on because it eats up quite a bit of memory, processing power of your computer. It slows it down basically. But turn it on, relaunch once, like reload the module once. Here we go. That's all you need to do. Turn it off again. Then go back to the EMCCV directory in Finder or Windows Explorer. And let's go back to the EMCCV prototype directory. There is a folder named logs. Within that is now a folder SailorX version 3. Within that is a folder with today's date. And in here is a folder called layers. That's the one we want. And this is the file we want to look at. So let's open that up. Actually, text will be just fine. Doop-de-doo. Here we go. Okay, that's the file I wanted to show you. Can we increase the font size a bit? Yes, here we go. Okay, so this is, as the file says, a list of layers. All layers, all files in the order, in layer order, listed. So the bottom layer is at the layer -1000, and that's the backgrounds, which makes sense. They're at the very back, right? So on top of that comes background gradients, overlays, ponytails, because they're behind the body, some clothes that are also parts that are behind the body, pigtails, buns, more pigtails. Okay, so we need to figure out where we want our braid to go. And I'm thinking, okay, it needs to be behind the head, obviously. But it needs to be in front of the back hair. So this is hair down. I know that this is the hair that goes down, and the braid needs to be in front of the back hair, also in front of the ponytails, but behind, yeah, the pigtails don't really matter because they don't overlap. What have we got down here? Collar. Yeah, that's irrelevant. Back bow. Okay, so the down hair should be behind the braid, but everything else should be in front of it. So let's pick layer. Here we go. This is -10. This is -8. So to make sure that it ends up between these two layers, let's choose -9. That seems to make sense. So I'll close that down. I'll get back to my... Nope, that's the wrong one. Nope, that was the right one actually. Okay, here we go. Layer... I said -9, correct? Here we go. So let's relaunch. Excitement. Okay. Kaorinite. Here we go. That looks good. Top hair. Tied back. Yep. Let's turn it white just to, for good measure. Yes. By the way, I love the suggestion. Thank you so much. You know who you are. I'm loving this braid. I've played around with it already quite a bit. Yeah, so I think we're done. Let's just, should always test, you know, the things that you wouldn't expect it to be combined with. But this is looking good. The buns, yeah, the buns are behind the braid. That is what I wanted. Okay, so we're done. Did I leave anything out? I don't think so. What you should do though, for good measure, let's go back into it. Go to the very top and make sure that you give this version a different name. So say, if I wasn't me, but one of you, I would maybe, you know, add my name behind it. This is a valid version number, version name. Just in case you start sharing your version, it shouldn't conflict with any other versions, just so it's easily identifiable. Yeah, that's basically it. All right. So, if you have any questions, leave me comments below, either on YouTube, on DeviantArt, or send me a message on Patreon. Always appreciate your support on Patreon, obviously. The Patreon, my patrons have already had access to this little extra for a couple of weeks now, I think. Um, Help me support the project. I really want to do this full time, basically. I want to spend way more time developing this drawing artwork for it. So any support, even if it's just a little dollar a month, will help a lot. But even if you can't do that, spread the word. Post your creations in DeviantArt groups for dolls, doll makers, etc. On forums, anywhere you can. Post it to your website. You don't even need to leave credit as long as you leave the footer intact, because it already says in there EMCCV and which version of the module you used. So I'm super grateful for any kind of support you can give me. I hope this was helpful. Let me know if I missed anything, if you want to know any more. And yeah, otherwise, stay tuned and keep creating. Bye bye.